Part 1. You are a dedicated student of the self. You excavate your past, you map your traumas, you analyze your limiting beliefs, believing that this deep, difficult work is the sacred key to unlocking the abundance you deserve. You are praised for your courage, for your willingness to do the work. But what if this noble habit is not a pathway to freedom, but the very architecture of your prison? What if your relentless focus on healing your money wounds is the very habit that is keeping you broke? This story will expose the subtle but powerful trap of using spiritual work as a form of sophisticated procrastination. It will show you how to know when healing has become a hiding place, and it will give you the key to finally stepping out of the past and into your wealthy, worthy, and already healed future. David was an expert in the art of self-excavation. At 42, he was a gifted but financially struggling life coach in Mexico City. His apartment in the Bohemian La Condesa neighborhood was less of a home and more of a laboratory for personal development. He had a library that would rival a psychology department's, and he had a deep, compassionate understanding of the human psyche. He could guide his clients through their darkest shadows with the skill of a seasoned therapist. He was a master of the why. He could trace any present-day issue, especially his own chronic lack of financial success, back to a specific childhood event, an ancestral pattern, or a core limiting belief. His most profound desire was to be a living, breathing testament to the work he taught. He dreamed of a life of effortless abundance, where he could serve his clients from a place of overflow, not from a place of quiet, gnawing scarcity. He dreamed of launching a series of high-end, transformative retreats in the beautiful, mystical landscapes outside the city, but the project remained a perpetual, someday, always waiting for him to complete one more layer of his own healing. His antagonist was a subtle and insidious one, the habit of endless healing. It was a belief system that looked and felt exactly like dedicated spiritual work. It told him, "You are not yet worthy of wealth. There is still one more wound to heal, one more pattern to release. You cannot build a prosperous future on a broken foundation." This habit was a master of disguise. It cloaked his fear of failure in the noble language of self-improvement. It convinced him that his constant analysis of his own brokenness was a sign of his spiritual depth, when in fact, it was the very thing anchoring him to a reality of not enough. He was a brilliant doctor who spent all his time diagnosing his own illness, never allowing himself to simply get up and walk out into the sunshine. Is he trapped in this virtuous cycle of self-improvement, forever digging for a root that can never be found? Or is there a moment when the digging must stop, a moment when he must choose to believe that he is already whole, already worthy, and already free? If you have ever felt that your healing journey has become a never-ending story that is holding you back from the life you desire, subscribe. This story is your permission to write a new ending. Part 2. David's state of almost there had become his permanent address. The previous loop closed. He had identified the intellectual trap of his endless healing. The new loop opened with a financial rock bottom that could no longer be ignored. A major client, his primary source of income, had to end their sessions, and his meager savings were evaporating. The pressure was no longer a theoretical concept, it was a visceral, daily reality. The someday of his retreat dream felt more distant than ever. In a state of quiet desperation, he did something he hadn't done in years. He left the city and took a bus to the small, vibrant town of Tepoztlan, a place nestled in the shadow of a dramatic mountain range, famous for its mystical energy and its ancient, pre-Hispanic history. He wasn't going there to heal a trauma. He was simply running away from the shame of his own failure. He wandered through the town's colorful market, the smells of copal incense and fresh corn tortillas filling the air, feeling like a ghost, a fraud who taught others how to live a life he couldn't create for himself. It was in the shadow of the Tepozteco pyramid, a place of ancient power, that he saw her. She was a woman in her late 70s, with a cascade of silver hair braided with ribbons, her face a beautiful testament to a life lived in the sun. She was sitting on a simple blanket, not selling trinkets or offering readings, but creating intricate, vibrant yarn paintings, a traditional art of the Huacal people. She worked with a look of such profound, joyful, and completely absorbed concentration that she seemed to be in a world of her own. There was no struggle in her expression, no deep excavation. There was only the simple, profound act of creation. This was Abuela Ixchel. David, the coach, felt an uncharacteristic pull. He sat down near her, not as a teacher, but as a weary traveler. He watched her hands for a long time as they pressed brightly colored yarn into a wax-covered board, creating images of deer, eagles, and the sun. Finally, she looked up, and her dark, ancient eyes saw not his carefully constructed persona, but the deep weariness of his soul. "You carry a very heavy library in your head, little brother," she said, her voice warm and melodic. "So many books about water. You must be very thirsty." The metaphor was so precise, so devastatingly accurate, that it broke through his defenses. He found himself confessing everything: his dream, his knowledge, his endless analysis of his own wounds, and his profound, humiliating lack of results. He told her about his healing work, expecting her to be impressed by his dedication. Abuela Ixchel listened with a deep, patient stillness. When he was finished, she did not offer a diagnosis or a new healing modality. She held up her work in progress, a brilliant depiction of a hummingbird. "This little one, the colibri," she said, "spends its days in the present. It does not sit in the nest and remember the storm of yesterday. It does not worry about the flower of tomorrow. It simply flies to the nectar that is right in front of it. Your healing work has become a very comfortable nest. You decorate it with the beautiful feathers of your pain. You are very safe there. But there is no nectar in the nest." She then gave him a task that was, for him, the most terrifying thing she could have said. "For 1 week," she said, "you are forbidden to enter your library. You are forbidden to analyze your past. Your only work is to find one drop of nectar, one small, simple thing in the present moment that brings you joy, and give it all of your attention. That is all." He has been challenged by a woman of ancient wisdom to abandon his life's work of self-analysis and engage in a radical act of present-moment awareness. Can a man whose entire identity is built on understanding his past possibly find freedom by choosing to ignore it? What happens when the great diagnostician is forbidden from looking for the disease? Part 3. David accepted Abuela Ixchel's challenge, his mind screaming in protest. It felt like a betrayal of his entire philosophy. This closed the previous loop. He had his mentor and his paradoxical mission. The new loop of conflict began the next morning. He woke with his habitual urge to grab his journal and start dissecting a dream or analyzing an anxious feeling. But he remembered his promise. He was forbidden from entering the nest. He forced himself out of his small rented room and into the vibrant morning of Tepoztlan. His task was to find one drop of nectar. But his mind, so expertly trained to find the wound, was completely blind to the joy. He walked through the market, and instead of seeing the vibrant colors of the fruit, he found himself analyzing the tired expression on the face of a vendor and connecting it to his own ancestral patterns of struggle. He sat in a cafe, and instead of savoring the rich, dark Oaxacan coffee, he began to deconstruct the subtle power dynamics between the other patrons. He was a prisoner of his own analytical habit. The nectar was everywhere, but he had forgotten how to taste it. His internal conflict was a grinding, frustrating war. His antagonist, the habit of endless healing, was a master strategist. It didn't just attack him with criticism, it attacked him with logic and virtue. "This is irresponsible," the voice would argue. "You are engaging in spiritual bypassing. You are ignoring your unhealed wounds. They will fester if you do not attend to them. True abundance can only be built on a foundation of complete healing. You are being lazy." The habit was so seductive because it felt so right, so responsible. The external conflict arrived in the form of a series of desperate text messages from his younger sister, Clara. Her husband had just lost his job, and they were in a financial crisis. She was asking to borrow money David simply did not have. "I don't understand, David," she wrote, her words a painful echo of his own deepest fears. "You're so wise. You help so many people. Why are you still struggling? All this work you do on yourself, what is it for?" Her question was a dagger. It was the voice of the world, of his family, asking for the results he could not produce. The shame was immense. His healing was a self-indulgent luxury he couldn't even afford. He went to find Abuela Ixchel, his heart heavy with the proof of his failure. He told her about his inability to find the nectar, about his sister's crisis, about the profound shame of his own hypocrisy. She was finishing her hummingbird yarn painting. She pressed the final, iridescent green thread into the wax and held it up. "You are trying to think your way to joy," she said, her voice full of a fierce compassion. "Joy is not a thought. It is a vibration. It is a taste. It is a feeling in the body. You are still in your library, reading the books about the hummingbird. You must become the hummingbird. You must move. You must act. Your nectar is not in a feeling. It is in your gift. It is in the thing you are most afraid to do." He is being told that the cure for his paralysis is not more thinking, but embodied action. He has been given a direct challenge to step out of the nest and into the world. But his fear of failure, of not being healed enough, is a cage of his own making. How can he possibly take action when he feels so profoundly unworthy and unprepared? Part 4, the command to become the hummingbird, was the most terrifying instruction David had ever received. It meant he had to stop preparing and start doing. The loop of his passive observation was closed, and a new, more dynamic loop of active creation opened, filled with risk and emotional complexity. The immediate subtrauma was his sister's financial crisis. It was a real-world present-moment problem that his endless self-analysis could not solve. He had to do something. But what? He had no money to give her. All he had was his gift. With a heart full of terror and a new, fragile sense of purpose, he did the one thing he could do. He called Clara and said, "I don't have money to give you, but I have my time. Let me coach you and your husband. Let me help you with your mindset, with your strategy for finding new work. Let me give you the one thing I truly have in abundance." It was a radical act. He was offering to help someone else build their financial reality while his own was in shambles. He was choosing to act as if he were already the successful, abundant coach he dreamed of being. This act of service began to change him. For the first time, he was using his knowledge not as a tool for self-excavation, but as a tool for creation in the present moment. He and his sister had daily calls. He was brilliant, guiding her and her husband with a clarity and compassion that surprised even himself. In helping them, he was, for the first time, truly healing himself. He was getting out of his own story and into the service of another's. Meanwhile, his relationship with Tepoztlán deepened. He started to find his nectar. It wasn't in a grand epiphany, but in the small, embodied moments. The taste of a perfectly ripe mango. The feeling of the sun on his face as he hiked up to the Tepoztico pyramid. The sound of the Nahuatl language being spoken by the old women in the market. He started to spend more time with Abuela Ixchel, not just watching, but helping her. He would help her stretch the yarn, prepare the wax boards. He was learning, through the simple, repetitive motion, the joy of being in a creative flow, a state his mind had been blocking for years. The pressure of his own brokenness was still there, a constant reality. But its power over him was diminishing. His focus was shifting from his own lack to his sister's need and his own creative process. He was slowly, painstakingly, breaking the habit of endless healing by replacing it with a new habit, the habit of present-moment creation and service. He was so focused on being the hummingbird that he started to forget about the nest. He has taken the terrifying leap into action, using his gift in service to another despite his own lack. He is building a new habit. But will this new way of being actually produce a tangible result in his own life? Can an act of service truly be the secret backdoor to his own abundance? Part 5. After a month of intense, daily coaching, something shifted for David's sister and her husband. They didn't just find new jobs. They used the crisis as an opportunity to completely reinvent their careers. His brother-in-law, a former accountant, discovered a passion for sustainable farming and found a position managing an organic farm. Clara, a former marketing manager, used her skills to help the farm build a direct-to-consumer brand. They were happier and more fulfilled than ever before. One evening, Clara called David, her voice overflowing with a joy he hadn't heard in years. "David, you didn't just help us find jobs," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You helped us find our souls. I don't know how we can ever repay you." In that moment, David felt a wave of satisfaction so profound it was like a physical healing. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated worthiness. It was not something he had analyzed or excavated. It was something he had earned through his own embodied action and service. The loop of his paralysis was officially and completely shattered. The very next day, a second, even more powerful event occurred. He was sitting with Abuela Ixchel, helping her sketch a new design for a yarn painting. An American woman, elegant and with an air of quiet power, approached them. She had been watching Abuela Ixchel work for a long time. "Your art is medicine," the woman said to the old artist. "I run a foundation that supports indigenous artists in preserving their traditions. We would be honored to provide a grant to ensure this work continues." Abuela Ixchel smiled her timeless smile. "My work will continue as long as I have breath," she said. "But this one," she said, placing a warm, wrinkled hand on David's arm, "he is a different kind of artist. He is a healer of stories. He is the one who needs the grant." The woman, whose name was Anya, turned her intelligent gaze to David. "A healer of stories?" she asked, intrigued. Before his old analytical mind could kick in, David spoke from his new, embodied center. He told her his story. He told her about his old habit of endless healing and his new practice of present-moment creation. He told her about his dream of creating transformative retreats. He was not pitching. He was not selling. He was simply telling his truth, a truth he had finally earned. Anya listened, completely captivated. "My foundation," she said when he was finished, "is expanding. We are creating a new branch dedicated to what we're calling conscious leadership. We are looking for people who are bridging ancient wisdom and modern challenges. We have been looking for a director to create and lead a series of retreats for our grant recipients, artists, activists, entrepreneurs. It seems," she said, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face, "that our search may be over." He finally understood what Abuela Ixchel meant. The nectar was not a feeling he had to find. It was a reality he had to create through his own embodied action. He has been offered his dream on a silver platter, not because he finally healed himself, but because he finally forgot about himself and stepped into his purpose. This is the manifestation. But what happens when a man who has spent years studying the map of trauma is finally asked to lead others into the land of creation? This profound shift from healing to creating has sparked a realization in you? Subscribe for more stories that will help you break your own cycles and step into your power. Part 6. The offer from Anya's foundation was a quantum leap, a complete and total reality shift. The previous loop closed, he had received his manifestation. Now, he had to step into the consequences of that new reality. He accepted the position as Director of Conscious Leadership Retreats. The contract came with a salary that was more than he had ever earned, and a budget to bring his dream retreat center to life in the mountains outside Tepoztlan. His first action was to send a significant portion of his signing bonus to his sister, not as a loan, but as a gift. It was a joyful, effortless act that sealed the healing of his own scarcity wound far more powerfully than 1,000 hours of journaling ever could have. The consequences of his new role were immediate. He was no longer a lone, struggling coach. He was a leader, a creator, a man with a team and a mission. The shift in his identity was profound. He moved to Tepoztlan permanently, finding a beautiful, simple home with a view of the mountains. He worked with a local architect to design the retreat center, a space that was a perfect fusion of modern simplicity and indigenous wisdom, a physical embodiment of his own journey. The work was demanding, but it was a different kind of work. It was creative, expansive, and deeply joyful. He was no longer excavating the past, he was building the future. The habit of endless healing tried to reassert itself in moments of stress. The voice would whisper, "Are you sure you're qualified for this? You still have your own issues to deal with." But now, he had a new response. He had the undeniable, embodied proof of his own transformation. He would feel the fear, and then he would consciously shift his focus back to the present moment, back to the task at hand, back to the nectar of his work. He was no longer trying to eradicate his wounds, he was integrating them into a larger story of purpose and creation. His past was no longer a foundation to be repaired. It was simply a library of wisdom he could draw upon to help others. He has the job, the money, the purpose. He has stepped into his new reality. But the deepest healing is not just about changing one's own life, it is about changing the lives of others. Can he successfully translate his profound personal journey into a curriculum that can truly set other people free from the same trap he was in? Part 7. The first Healed Enough to Be Wealthy retreat was scheduled. This was the ultimate test, the one promised in the last chapter. The attendees were a diverse group of the Foundation's grant recipients, a filmmaker from New York, an indigenous rights activist from the Amazon, a tech entrepreneur from Nairobi. They were all brilliant, driven, and, as David quickly discovered, they all shared the same subtle affliction he had suffered from. They were so identified with their righteous struggles and their past traumas that it was blocking their ability to receive the full abundance their incredible work deserved. This was his dark night of the soul as a leader. The fear that he was a fraud, that he was not healed enough to guide these incredible people, was immense. The night before the retreat began, he was gripped by a powerful wave of self-doubt. The temptation to fall back into his old patterns, to start frantically journaling about his own insecurities, was almost overwhelming. Instead, he went to find Abuela Ixchel. She was sitting by a fire under the star-filled sky. He sat with her in silence for a long time. The greatest healers do not show you they're healed.
Scars, she said softly, as if reading his mind. They show you their beautiful, present moment creations. You are not here to teach them about the nest. You are here to teach them how to fly. I consolidated his growth by completely redesigning the retreat curriculum that night. Throughout all the modules on trauma mapping and ancestral healing, I replaced them with a simple, powerful structure built around his own journey. The first day was dedicated to forgetting the nest, gently guiding the participants to see how their focus on their wounds had become a comfortable identity. The second day was about finding the nectar, a day of pure, embodied, present moment joy, involving art, nature, and movement. The third day was about becoming the hummingbird, a day focused on committing to a single, terrifying, and joyful act of service or creation. It was a radical, counterintuitive approach. It was a retreat about healing that involved very little talk about healing. I was not just teaching a concept, I was creating an environment, a vibrational field, where the participants could experience their own wholeness in the present moment. I was choosing to trust that a joyful, creative present was a more powerful healer than 1,000 doors of analyzing a painful past. The curriculum is a radical leap of faith, a direct challenge to the entire personal development industry. Will these brilliant, trauma-aware participants accept this new paradigm, or will they reject it as a form of spiritual bypassing, leaving David exposed as a well-intentioned but naive fraud? Part 8. The retreat began. The participants arrived at the beautiful, newly built center, their faces a mixture of hope and skepticism. The first day was challenging. As David guided them through the process of seeing how their healing stories had become identities, there was resistance. A filmmaker argued, "But my pain is the source of my art." An activist insisted, "My anger at injustice is the fuel for my work." David did not argue. He did not try to convince them with logic. He simply held a calm, compassionate space. He told his own story, his voice full of a humble, authentic vulnerability. He spoke of his own comfortable nest and his fear of flying. He was not teaching from a place of superior authority, but as a fellow traveler who was just a few steps ahead on the path. The tension in the room was palpable. He was walking a tightrope. He had to honor their very real past traumas while simultaneously inviting them to believe that they were no longer defined by them. The turning point of the retreat, the moment that would either make or break the entire experience, was scheduled for the second evening. He had invited Abuela Ixchel to the retreat. He had also invited a local group of traditional musicians. He was preparing to move the participants out of their heads and into their bodies. The plan was simple and terrifying, a night of fear, music, and dance. There would be no analysis, no processing. Only rhythm. Only presence. And knew it was a huge risk. He was asking a group of highly intellectual, trauma-aware individuals to let go of their stories and surrender to the primal, non-verbal wisdom of the body. He was about to ask the great diagnosticians to put down their charts and simply join the dance. The fire is lit. The drums are waiting. The participants are poised between their old stories and a new experience. Will this radical, embodied experiment break through their analytical defenses and catalyze a true transformation, or will it backfire, proving that some wounds are simply too deep to be danced away? Part 9. The sunset, and a large, crackling bonfire was the only light in the central courtyard of the retreat center. The participants sat in a circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, their energy a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated resistance. The musicians began to play, a simple, hypnotic rhythm of drum and flute. David stood up. He did not give a lecture. He did not offer an explanation. He simply spoke from his heart. For many of us a vegan, his voice calm and resonant. Our stories of pain are the most powerful stories we have. We have polished them, we have analyzed them, we have turned them into art. And we are right to honor them. But tonight, I invite you to a different kind of story. A story that is told not with words, but with your breath. Not with your mind, but with your feet. There is no right way or wrong way. The only invitation is to let the fear outside match the fear inside. Attendí the brave sting e a deber done as a facilitate. He walked over to Abuela Ischel, took her hand, and led her into the center of the circle. They began to move. Not a performance, but a simple, joyful, and deeply authentic dance. A dance of an old woman who was one with the earth and a man who had finally come home to his own body. For a long time, no one else moved. They watched, their analytical minds still working, observing, judging. But the rhythm was relentless. The joy on David's and Ischel's faces was infectious. Then, one person, the activist who had spoken of her anger, stood up. She did not dance. She simply began to sway, her eyes closed. Then another, the filmmaker, stood and began to move her hands, as if she were sculpting the air. And then, like a great, slow, beautiful wave, they all rose. What happened next was not a wild party. It was a profound, collective, somatic release. Each person moved in their own way. The activist's anger transformed into a powerful, stamping dance of fierce, joyful life force. The filmmaker's grief became a fluid, graceful dance of release. The tech entrepreneur's anxiety melted into a playful, childlike skipping. They were not performing. They were praying with their bodies. David had not healed them. He had created a safe, sacred space for them to access their own innate, embodied wholeness. The habit of endless healing was broken, not by analysis, but by the undeniable, self-evident joy of the present moment. The premise of the introduction was fulfilled. The work was not to heal the wound, but to remember the wholeness that was never, ever broken. The breakthrough is complete. The participants have experienced a new and powerful truth. But what happens when the fear dies down and they must return to their lives and their work? How does one integrate a night of ecstatic, embodied healing into the practical reality of everyday life? Part yes. The final day of the retreat was a different world. The participants were not the same people who had arrived 3 days earlier. The heaviness was gone, replaced by a light, playful, and powerful sense of their own potential. They did not talk about their traumas. They talked about their projects, their dreams, their futures, but they spoke from a new place of
embodied worthiness. The retreat had not erased their pasts, but it had unshackled them from them. David's life was now a living testament to his own teaching. The healed enough to be wealthy retreats became the cornerstone of the Foundation's work, a legendary experience that created profound, lasting change. He was no longer just a coach. He was a leader of a movement that was gently guiding the world of personal development away from the obsession with brokenness and toward the celebration of wholeness. He had finally understood the great paradox. The relentless focus on his own money wounds had been the very thing keeping him in a state of lack. It was a declaration to the universe that he was broken, and the universe, in its infinite, impartial wisdom, had simply agreed with him. The moment he stopped declaring himself a patient in need of healing and started acting like a healer who was already whole, his reality had no choice but to transform to match his new state of being. His abundance was not a reward for his healing. It was a reflection of his decision to be whole. His personal journey has created a new paradigm of healing and empowerment, for himself and for countless others. But what is the next evolution for a soul who has learned to lead others out of the library of the past and into the dance of the present? We see David a year later, not at his retreat center, but in Mexico City. He is at a joyous family gathering, celebrating his sister Clara's success. Her organic farm-to-table business is thriving. He is not there as a coach or a healer. He is just there as a brother, laughing, eating, and being present. He sees his own reflection in a window, and for the first time, he does not see a project to be fixed or a past to be analyzed. He just sees a happy, whole, and profoundly abundant man. He has finally, truly, come home to himself. He learned that the most profound, spiritual work was to stop working on himself and start living. What story of your own past are you ready to stop analyzing and start rewriting through your joyful, present-moment actions? The habit of endless healing can be a subtle and powerful trap. It keeps us focused on our past wounds instead of our present power. Your past is a story, but it is not the only story you can tell. Your true point of power is right now. Your challenge is this: for 1 week, take a holiday from healing yourself. Forbid yourself from analyzing your past or diagnosing your present. Instead, channel all of that focused energy into one simple, creative, or service-based action. Write 1 page of the book. Make 1 healthy meal for your family. Offer 1 piece of advice to a friend. Shift from being a patient to being a creator. What happened? Share your experience of this radical shift in focus in the comments below. For more stories that will challenge your deepest spiritual beliefs and guide you to a more powerful and embodied truth, make sure you subscribe and join this community of creators.